The Boys by Skip Bayless.
The entourage paraded out of the locker room tunnel as the third quarter ended at Texas Stadium. The group included Prince Bandar, Saudi Arabia's ambassador to the United States and one of the most powerful men in the Middle East. Prince Bandar, one of the Dallas Cowboys' biggest fans, was surrounded by 6 of his bodyguards who carried walkie-talkies and scanned the crowd. But few, if any, among the rowdy crowd of 63,101 knew or cared who Prince Bandar was. At the head of this conspicuous contingent was Cowboy owner, president, and general manager Jerry Jones, who had become one of the most powerful men in Dallas and the National Football League. Many in the crowd gave Jones a standing roar. What a moment this was for this man. Just 4 years earlier, Jones had been the most hated man in Cowboydom, the man who fired Tom Landry. But now Jones's Cowboys led the Bears 27-0 in the regular season finale of 1992. His Cowboys, already National Football Conference East champs, were about to win their 13th game. No Cowboy team had ever won 13, even under Landry. For the fans, it was Dallas in Wonderland again. The Cowboys were back impossibly quickly from a 1-15 record in 1989. And this team could have easily been 15-1. Crank up the new theme song at Texas Stadium, Thin Lizzy's The Boys Are Back in Town. Just 4 years earlier, Jones had come from nowhere, from Arkansas, to buy the Cowboys. He hired his best friend, Jimmy Johnson, his University of Arkansas roommate and teammate, to replace the legendary Landry. Together in 1989, Jones and Johnson led the National Football League in ridicule received. Johnson had come straight from the University of Miami with no NFL coaching experience. Philadelphia Eagle coach Buddy Ryan had dismissed him as a college coach. No, East Carolina's on an NFL schedule, Ryan had said with a chuckle. Jones was nicknamed Jethro by fans and by media critics who considered this oil man the NFL equivalent of a Beverly hillbilly. Jones and Johnson quickly traded their one superstar, Herschel Walker. They turned the Cowboys upside down. They didn't just disregard the NFL's how-to manual, they burned it. Now this. This, Jones had said before leaving his owner's suite for the field on that December day in 1992, is going to be the greatest story ever told. We're just on the 2nd or 3rd chapter of Gone with the Wind here. We are going to win Super Bowls. Jones made it plural. Suddenly it seemed that the Cowboys, the NFL's youngest team according to the league office, had a chance to win the franchise's first NFL championship in 15 years. Could it be? Emmitt Smith had just clinched his 2nd straight NFL rushing title and had retired for the day. Quarterback Troy Aikman was safely done for the day, too. For the first time as a pro, Aikman had made it through the season without a serious injury. The whole team, in fact, was remarkably injury-free with 2 weeks to prepare for a home playoff game. Had this team ever been blessed? Its offense was beginning to click and control the ball the way Joe Montana's San Francisco attack did in the early 80s. But it was the starless defense that had won over the usually star-struck city. By holding the Bears to 92 total yards, the defense would clinch the NFL's #1 statistical ranking, although not one member of the unit would be named to the Pro Bowl. What a lovable blue-collar bunch these boys were. So young, innocent, unspoiled, and untroubled. So different from Landry's star-laden, made-for-Hollywood, private party teams. What a sight. Jerry Jones parading up the sideline toward the Cowboy bench, pumping both fists to the crowd. "Cowboys!" he yelled again and again. Jones was smiling so hard it looked as if his skin might split. Jones was always smiling, Steve McQueen in a funhouse mirror. Gerald Wayne Jones from Little Rock had become a chicken-fried piper to thousands of new-breed Cowboy fans. At age 50, he had attracted 20,000 new season ticket holders with an average age of about 30. When he had bought the team, the average age of a season ticket holder had been about 55. Jones had built a tented honky-tonk called the Corral outside Gate 8 in the parking lot, and he wasn't above sipping a cold one and talking football with the Corral's clientele. Jones had shown folks it was okay to raise Cain in what used to be Landry's house of worship. Now the fans were raising the roof on a stadium without one. What a day this was to be a Cowboy fan at Texas Stadium. This was not, however, a good day to be a Cowboy player or assistant coach. A series of events, any one of which would have kept Johnson on edge, combined to push him over it. 2 were lost fumbles by reserve running back Kervin Richards, the second of which was returned 42 yards for a Bear touchdown that cut the Cowboy lead to 27-14 with just over 9 minutes remaining. A blowout was becoming a football game again. Another was the arrival of Jones with Bandar and his men. As the lead shrank and Johnson seethed, Jones and the Prince were congratulating players in the bench area who appeared to be through for the day. Johnson snapped. "First team, get ready," he yelled. Smith and Aikman threw their pads and helmets back on. Aikman began quickly to warm up his arm. Offensive line coach Tony Wise wondered what the hell was going on. Did Johnson really want to risk sending Smith and Aikman back into a game that had no effect on the Cowboys' playoff situation? Wise and defensive coordinator Dave Wannstedt, the 2 assistants Johnson called his best friends, feared that Johnson had lost it. But reason prevailed. Johnson ordered some first-teamers back onto the field. Smith and Aikman remained on the sidelines. The Cowboys won 27-14. Before the media was allowed into the locker room, Johnson blasted the team for its sloppy play in the fourth quarter. Then he marched across the hall to the interview room for his post-game question and answer session with the media. Usually after wins, these sessions last 15 or 20 minutes. But for the 3rd straight week, Johnson ended the interview quickly and heatedly. Even after the 13th win, Johnson appeared to be on the edge of a breakdown. To the first 5 questions, he gave terse defensive answers. When agitated in front of the media, Johnson's extraordinarily blue eyes dart from side to side as he weighs the consequences of a headline-making blow-up. He smacks his lips as if he had just tasted something sour. His face, rounded by nachos and Heinekens, grows danger zone red. Johnson, a neatness nut who, at age 49, lives alone in a house with white carpet, said that he was not happy with the sloppy play in the fourth quarter, and when the next question asked if he was glad to get his personal NFL record up to 500, he barked a sharp no and stormed off the platform. Ironically, Johnson had done a Ditka. While down the hall, the Bears coach, Mike Ditka, was being as philosophical, quotable, and charming as Johnson can be. Yet Ditka had lost and probably knew he would soon be fired. He called the Cowboys a very good football team and predicted they would prove it to a lot of people in the playoffs. His words would have had a hollow ring in the winners' locker room. Troy Aikman says that many players were near mutinous, and not just because of Johnson's strange behavior after the Bear game. Johnson had exploded after 3 straight games, 2 of them victories. He had let the players have it on the team plane returning from a December 13th loss in Washington, saying they weren't taking it as hard as he was. It turned into an ugly scene that shook the franchise for a week and especially infuriated Aikman. But his unusually emotional response came in the form of the most dominant performance of his career the following Monday night in Atlanta. He had finally taken over a game and taken over a team from a coach he had never quite trusted. For 3 seasons, Johnson had doubted Aikman's delicate confidence and leadership ability, once going so far as to say privately that Troy Aikman had been a loser in college and would never be anything but a loser in the pros. Aikman had doubted Johnson's confidence in him because Johnson had drafted quarterback Steve Walsh in 1989 and had stuck with quarterback Steve Berline when Aikman was ready to return from an injury in 1991. So Aikman felt he had to save the 92 season. Thanks mostly to him, the Cowboys blasted Atlanta 41-17. Yet Johnson blasted them again during the fourth quarter and in the post-game locker room. Now this franchise record 13th win against the Bears had triggered another Johnson tirade, after which he had steamed into Jones' private box suite. When Larry Lacewell, the Cowboys' college scouting director, heard about Johnson's ire, he followed Johnson, and when Lacewell walked into the box, Johnson and Jones's noses were about 3 inches apart. Johnson had coached defense under Lacewell at Wichita State and Arkansas State, and at 56, Lacewell had the maturity to serve as a buffer between the two men. Instead of quitting or doing something worse, Johnson had settled for clenching his teeth. Was it all just another of Johnson's inexplicable, unpredictable moods? Was this just another night in the life of Psycho Jimmy, as some insiders called him? Johnson's worst moods are triggered by his rage to win. If he wins, he can basically do or say whatever he feels. He can rule his world and control it. But Jones is the one man in Johnson's world he cannot control. Like it or not, Johnson has a boss, and that boss insists on being Johnson's general manager, who is actively involved in drafting, trading, and everything but game planning. The last word is mine, says Jones. During the 1992 season, this often drove Johnson nuts. He doesn't want to share the stage or credit with anyone, especially someone whose football knowledge he doesn't respect. What tormented Johnson most was the image that he and Jones were, quote-unquote, buddies from Arkansas. Drinking buddies, football buddies, partners. I don't know where those buddy stories started, he said. I didn't do anything to kill them. I don't know. Maybe you don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. But we never went out socially at Arkansas. We were both offensive guards as sophomores. We did room together, maybe 20 nights on the road, but that was because our rooms were assigned by alphabetical order. And we were co-captains as seniors. Every senior was a co-captain. Neither of us talked much about our futures. Jerry was going to make money, and I was going to be an industrial psychologist. Yet from the day Jones bought the team, February 25th, 1989, the legend of Jimmy and Jerry had grown. Grown like Jones's nose? No, he never directly said he and Johnson had lain awake nights in the Arkansas dorm discussing how, together, they would one day dominate the NFL. But Jones didn't discourage the myth either. Privately, Johnson fumed after reading how Jones took credit for playing key roles in making draft picks and trades and rebuilding the Cowboys so quickly. Appearances count for Johnson, too. He is known for the hair, his uniquely styled and sprayed coif with lines something like a classic Corvette. He meticulously presents a best-dressed image in power suits and ties, and privately makes fun of the disheveled coaches he sees on TV. Jones, on the other hand, still looks as if he pays $2.50 for his haircuts and always seems to be wearing slacks that are an inch short. He always wears a coat and tie, but in a room full of downtown Dallas businessmen, you'd probably guess right away who was from Little Rock. And this guy was now the hero of millions of fans for bringing the Dallas Cowboys back? Actually, it is difficult to know for sure how important a role Jones played in the two trades for defensive end Charles Haley and safety Thomas Everett that lifted the 13-3 Cowboys into Super Bowl contention. Johnson and Jones have given conflicting interpretations, yet Jones makes a solid case for himself. Is it the truth that haunts Johnson? In the wake of the Bears game, Johnson's behavior could have led to a full-blown battle for authority. That it didn't is a reflection of the man at whom the anger was directed. Through Johnson's 3-week reign of terror, Jones was the one person in the organization who shrugged it off. The day after Johnson confronted him in his box, Jones said he had seen Johnson at other times even more, quote-unquote, puffed up with anger. You had to wonder whether Jones' relentless optimism made him oblivious to the depths of Johnson's bitterness. Was he being a little naive? No, said Jones. Jimmy's smart enough not to push me too far. Listen, Jimmy knows I can be volatile too. I tried to explain to Jimmy that I respect the sanctity of the locker room and sidelines, but there are certain things, such as entertaining Bandar and important sponsors, that have to be done for the overall good of the club. As the football world pressure built on Johnson's Cowboys, Jones constantly provided that kind of bright-side balance and perspective. And Jones was just cocky enough to think he could harness Johnson's explosive talent. He had helped create his own Jethro image with a remark at a press conference just before he bought the team. Jimmy Johnson will be worth 5 Heisman Trophy winners and 5 first-round draft choices, Jones said. In retrospect, that was an understatement. So how exactly did it all come together, the season that ended out near Hollywood? How did the boys so quickly become men? How much of what happened had to do with the concept Johnson hates? Luck. Was Jones just a cockeyed optimist who stumbled into a championship? Or did Jones subtly coach the coach, as Raiders owner Al Davis had taught him to do? Did Jones save Johnson from himself? Or did Johnson, who can be a convincing actor, script some of his eruptions and manipulate his team and staff into overachieving? Who did deserve the most credit? The quarterback? The team? The assistants? The head coach? The owner? Whoever, the JJs were about to be viewed as the hot new model for how to succeed in the NFL in the 90s. On NFL Draft Day, April 26, 1992, Jimmy and Jerry sat in the Cowboys' war room at the team's Valley Ranch headquarters with what seemed like a cast of thousands, including an ESPN crew providing live shots for its national audience. What a spare, no-expense brain trust this appeared to be. 10 or 12 guys in coats and ties wedged around Johnson and Jones, who were sitting elbow to elbow at a huge table covered with telephones and stacks of draft information. This was the JJ's chance to wheel and deal and seal the lips of the chorus of doubters among fans and media who were afraid the 12-5 Cowboys of 1991 were a fluke. The JJs had gambled and lost two key performers to Plan B free agency, linebacker Jack Del Rio and place kicker Ken Willis. Johnson and Jones were expected to and needed to send trimmers through the draft. They had already made 40 trades in 3 seasons, and they had 2 picks in each of the first 3 rounds. On ESPN, it appeared to many fans that the Cowboys had more scouts and personnel men than draft picks. But what they were actually seeing was a little one-upmanship between Johnson and Jones. Jones had invited into the war room his son Stephen, the team's assistant general manager, Jerry Jr., who was in law school at SMU, and Mike McCoy, Jones' partner in the oil business and the Cowboys' sole minority share owner at 5%. Jones also allowed his treasurer, Jack Dixon, and his marketing director, George Hayes, to wander in and out along with some big-dollar sponsors who advertised at Texas Stadium or on Cowboy broadcasts. Johnson had no control over Jones' guest list, but he could have one of his own. On it were his sons Brent, a Dallas lawyer, and Chad, a Dallas stockbroker, and his attorney and drinking buddy, Nick Kristen, who lives in Miami. Johnson appeared to be saying that if Jerry were going to give his people exposure on ESPN, he'd be represented too. The men who have the most draft input, the assistant coaches, were off camera. The truth was that Johnson considered his scouting department one of the league's smallest, and more heads were about to roll. Personnel director John Wooten, who had served as Johnson's right-hand man during the 3 previous drafts, had been fired by Jones, and the team's scouting budget kept shrinking. The salaries earned by Johnson's assistant coaches, who were doing more and more of the work, were among the lowest in the league. But as much as he steamed, Johnson could do nothing about the budget or spending. As he said, that was not his area. It was Jones's. A few days before the draft, Jones sat in his office, Tex Schramm's old office, and spoke emotionally about his goal and his dream. Schramm, the president and general manager of the Landry Cowboys, had commissioned the building of the team's Valley Ranch complex just as the bottom had fallen out of the Dallas economy in 1985. Amid a model community of apartments, townhouses, condos, and houses, the headquarters and locker room facilities occupy a 1-story structure of Arizona sandstone that is spread over 80,000 square feet. Out back are 2 practice fields. Cowboys Center symbolized Schramm's Cowboys, Texas-style garish and extravagant. It did not suit Jones, who says he turns off the lights whenever he leaves a room. Jones kept Schramm around just long enough to guide him through the endless maze of expenses and payrolls. There was an awful lot of fat, said Jones. And he began hacking away at it. Many employees hired by Schramm claimed that Jones told them initially that their jobs were safe. Jones said they misinterpreted him. He couldn't understand why he should apologize for cutting a few costs and corners, for making prudent, long-range decisions, and for trying to turn the religious shrine known as the Dallas Cowboys into a profit-making business. In 1989, the Cowboys made $36.2 million in total revenue. In 1992, they made more than $65 million. Jones is a chip off the old block of J.W. Pat Jones, who worked North Little Rock the way Jerry now works a Dallas crowd. Pat Jones knew everybody and, as an entrepreneur, would try just about anything. He scored in supermarkets and eventually in insurance. But, says Jerry, his father gave him nothing. I've been there when I didn't have any money. About 25 years ago, I flew into Love Field in Dallas and went to rent a car and had to watch them cut my credit card in two and say, "Son, you're going to have to pay your bills." I've been there making a deal, been so scared my hand was shaking on the glass I was holding. For me, this is what I call mirror time. Someday I want to look in the mirror, look inside my soul and say, I did it right. I won Super Bowls while operating a very sound business. In contrast, Jimmy Johnson says that money isn't important to him. That's why he says he could make a great living at the blackjack tables. He has no fear of losing money, he says. With an IQ of 162, Johnson can immediately calculate odds at the gaming table just the way he does during football games. On draft day, Jones tried to explain, these two worlds orbit rather than collide, meaning that Jones balances Johnson's calculated risks by occasionally encouraging a gut-level plunge. So who actually has the final say on draft day? Everybody misses a major point here, Jones has said. The decisions are being made jointly. Everybody jumped all over me about that Jocks and Sox quote, but that's what happened. The night before he bought the team, Jones told a news conference aired live that his entire office and business would be at the complex. He intended to have an understanding of the complete situation, an understanding of the player situation, of the Sox and Jocks. It was his way of saying that the owners who cause problems are the ones who have very little idea of what's really going on. The more involved he was, the more he'd likely appreciate the way Jimmy wants to go in the draft. Jones would go along with Johnson on which cornerback to take, but he might rely on his own instincts on whether to trade dramatically up or down or take, say, a defensive lineman rather than a cornerback. I try to be very subtle in my influence, Jones said, but I have the last word. True, Johnson said before the draft, but I can handle Jerry. On draft day, Jones' orbiting worlds comment seemed accurate. Of the many trade offers flying back and forth, New England general manager Sam Jankovich's was the most intriguing. He wanted to move from the 19th pick in the first round to the 13th where the Cowboys sat. In exchange, Jankovich would toss in the 9th pick in the second round. Jones loved it. Johnson wanted Texas A&M cornerback Kevin Smith, but figured he'd still be available at pick 19. The deal was done. For Johnson, it was a calculated risk. For Jones, it was a dangerous gamble. When the Los Angeles Raiders took defensive lineman Chester McGlockton with the 16th pick, Johnson got a sinking feeling. Atlanta was next, then San Francisco, and then Dallas. Johnson's information was that San Francisco wanted a defensive back, probably safety Dana Hall of Washington. But what if they snatched Smith? Quickly, Johnson was on the phone to Atlanta. The Falcons wanted running back Tony Smith and were willing to switch places from 17th to 19th in exchange for a 4th-round pick. Johnson insisted that the Falcons throw in their 5th-rounder. Deal done. Dallas, from Atlanta, takes Kevin Smith. In an ESPN live shot, high fives went all around the huge table at Valley Ranch. The gamble had paid off. Yet didn't the gamble pay off literally, too? Did Jones want to take Smith 4 slots later so he could pay him pick number 17 money and save around $500,000? Jones insists he offered Smith the same contract he would have at pick 13, about $3.165 million for 4 years. Still, at number 13, New England took tackle Eugene Chung, who received a reported $3.9 million over 4 years. Jones was busy in other ways during the draft. Over the phone, he made tentative agreements with the top 5 Cowboy picks. The JJs had started this trend the year before when they had traded up for the first pick and used it on Russell Maryland, regarded as maybe the 8th or 10th best player in the draft. Before the pick, Maryland had agreed to take a down-the-line salary and sign immediately. In 1990, Emmitt Smith had held out and missed training camp. Not Maryland, and not the top 5 picks of 1992. I told each one of them, Jones said, that we were fully prepared to take someone else if we couldn't agree. But Jones liked his odds with Kevin Smith and East Carolina linebacker Robert Jones because Jones knew they both had grown up big Cowboy fans. So fundamentally, Jones said, using one of his favorite words, we had our top 5 signed and ready for minicamps on draft day, which is basically unheard of. Do you realize how much further ahead our rookies will be? Naturally, several teams called the league office to complain about Jones's signing tactics. Yet the NFL allows signability discussions before a player is drafted as long as a specific offer isn't made. The NFL investigated. No action was taken. We know the rules, said Personnel Director Bob Ackles. We're fine. Jones was, but Ackles soon wouldn't be. Ackles was a Jimmy Johnson favorite, a quiet little man who works hard. He was well known and well liked around the NFL and worked the telephones for Johnson, keeping him apprised of league gossip, doing groundwork contract negotiating, and taking care of endless administrative details. But he was doing a job that Jones and his son Stephen eventually wanted to share, and he was making too much money for Jones' budget, $128,000. The day Larry Lacewell was hired, Jones called Ackles into his office to talk about Ackles' new duties. At first, said Ackles, he was talking about how much the Cowboys needed me. Then we got into reorganization of duties, and he got very heated. All of a sudden, he said, "You're out of here. You've got 30 days, and in fact, I want you out of your office by the end of the day." I was stunned. Ackles soon landed in Phoenix as college scouting director for the Cardinals. An NFL insider, in constant touch with general managers and coaches, said Johnson privately was upset over the Ackles firing, though Johnson knew it was coming. The insider said, "People like Ackles had a lot to do with rebuilding the Cowboys. Ackles and Jimmy had one of the best relationships of personnel guy and coach in the league. This is a move by Jerry to take a little more power from Jimmy. I hope Jerry has learned a lot from his lunches with Al Davis and his dinners with Don Shula, because he's the only guy now." Once more, Jones was barbecued by several columnists for the Ackles firing. In USA Today, Gordon Forbes wrote, "Pro football always has been a cold, cruel business, but the Dallas Cowboys can claim the undisputed title of heavy-handed champions." Jones shifted quickly into damage control, but even today, he can't seem to shake the image of the rich rube. Front office staffers still whisper about him as if they are Mr. Drysdales and Jane Hathaways, and he is Jethro Jones, liable to get excited and do or say anything. When Jerry strikes again, some staff members whistled the Beverly Hillbillies theme song. While other general managers criticized Jones for not spending more time as GM around the players, the fans would have ridiculed him if he had started hanging out in the locker room. After his opening Sox and Jock speech, the fear among fans was that Jones had bought the Cowboys merely to rub egos with the players. That didn't happen. Jones is friendly with them, but keeps his distance. He has to maintain objectivity in negotiating contracts. "I know what I'm doing," Jones said as training camp approached. Something was going on with Troy Kenneth Aikman, something significant. It was early July in Dallas, and he had plenty of reasons to overheat. His backup, Steve Berline, had proven he could start for at least half of the NFL's teams. When Aikman was hurt, Berline's fan bandwagon had rolled through 6 straight wins in December and January. Jimmy Johnson had proclaimed the job was again Aikman's, but how quickly could he lose it if he started cold in September against Washington in the Monday night opener and the Giants 6 days later in the Meadowlands? Assistant coaches were a little nervous about the potential season-wrecking quarterback controversy. Yet for the first time in his pro career, Aikman appeared almost serenely confident. "Troy is different," Johnson said. "Several people in the organization have mentioned that he seems more at peace with himself." With training camp just a week away, Johnson talked about the new Troy every chance he got. He seemed to be on a media campaign to convince everyone, especially Troy, that Aikman was different this year. And it was working. Aikman is an unusual mix of city and country. He spent the first 12 years of his life in the Los Angeles suburb of Cerritos. Then his family moved to a ranch near Henrietta, Oklahoma. He started his college career at Oklahoma, but broke his leg against Johnson's Miami team, lost his job, and transferred to UCLA, where he was Hollywood hyped for the Heisman Trophy. Troy's father, Ken, had definitely raised a throwback. a raw bone boy with Jack Armstrong values. You work until your hands bleed. You show no pain. You keep your feelings to yourself. You treat people the way you want them to treat you. You do what you say you're going to do. You do anything for a friend. Yet Aikman does have an L.A. streak, a softer, sensitive side that sometimes leads to California-style introspection. One thing his father hadn't given Troy was an I love you. It's a situation, Ken Aikman told the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, where he doesn't have to ask to find out how I feel. He already knows. He doesn't need to be reassured. Johnson's attitude precisely. Yet Johnson found that Troy needed to be reassured. In Henrietta, Aikman came to value trust above everything, even winning. Earn his trust, and he'll do just about anything for you. In 1989, the JJs earned it and took advantage of it. Aikman was charmed by two of the most charming salesmen in Dallas, charmed by a couple of snakes, he thought. To his disbelief, Aikman found himself splitting training camp snaps with Steve Walsh, Jimmy's guy from Miami. Now, Jones takes the blame for the Walsh draft pick. He says he was carried away and influenced Jimmy. He thought Walsh would be a great asset. As it turned out, he was, when they traded him to New Orleans the next year for a first-round pick, a second, and a third. In 1990, without the Walsh threat or distraction, the job was Aikman's. But when the team fell to 3-7 in November, Aikman regressed. To complicate things, Aikman didn't believe offensive coordinator David Shula was handling the offense well or that Johnson was giving them enough support. Moreover, Johnson had agreed to hire a friend of Aikman's as strength coach, then hired someone else, and he hadn't made any attempt to keep quarterback coach Jerry Rome, whom Aikman trusted, when Rome was offered a better salary by Phoenix. Aikman wondered if Johnson wanted him to fail. Much of this got back to Johnson, who doesn't believe in stroking or babying the guy who is supposed to be the leader of his football team. The recent losing had sent Johnson's mood careening into the danger zone. It was then that he told some media people off camera that Aikman was a loser in college and would never be anything but a loser in the pros. Johnson's feelings got back to Aikman, who was beyond being surprised by anything Johnson said or did. Things had gotten ugly. The Cowboys ended 1990 ranked 28th and last in offensive production, prompting Johnson to make a tough, gutsy decision. He invited the wrath of Don Shula by demoting David Shula, who soon left for an assistant's job in Cincinnati. Johnson even had the audacity to offer David Shula's coordinator's job to Gary Stevens, who had worked for Johnson at Miami and was coaching Don Shula's offense. Stevens was ready to accept, until Don Shula told Stevens that accepting Johnson's offer would mean he would never get a head coaching job in the NFL if Don Shula had anything to do with it. Shula guaranteed it. Stevens remained with the Dolphins, and Johnson had to scramble. With Dave Wannstedt's input, Johnson threw together a list of potential replacements, all employed by other teams. But the next 5 on the list either stayed put, took other jobs, or didn't seem quite right for this job. Well, said Wannstedt, there's always Norv Turner. Wannstedt and Turner, the Rams' receivers coach, had worked together on the USC staff. Turner had called hoping to get an interview when Johnson had hired David Shula. Turner turned out to be the perfect man for the job, especially for Aikman. Turner is Aikman's kind of guy, a burgers and beers guy. He cusses with you, not at you. Turner takes the job, but not himself, seriously. He's usually the first coach in the office, often by 5 a.m., and sometimes doesn't get around to shaving. No hairspray or manicures for Turner. No peacock ego. Aikman could trust Turner because he wasn't one of them. Turner dedicated himself to putting Aikman in an offense that played to Aikman's untapped strengths, his release, his velocity, his accuracy. Turner installed seam-splitting patterns thrown on timing before the receiver's break. Mainly, Turner simplified everything. The Cowboy offense went from 28th and last to 9th in 1991, Turner's first season. As camp approached in July of 92, Aikman was much more comfortable and even began talking about the Cowboys as a possible Super Bowl team. On the other side of the ball, 39-year-old Dave Wannstedt was even more the soul of the Cowboy defense than Turner was of the offense. If players didn't quite trust the JJs, they believed without question in their two coordinators. And Wannstedt was the only man who could tell Johnson to relax or back off. As Wannstedt has said, Jimmy and he had been through some very, very intense times together. Wannstedt had been an offensive lineman at Pitt who blocked for future Cowboy star Tony Dorsett. He was drafted by Green Bay in the 15th round and spent 1 year on injured reserve before returning to Pitt as an assistant coach. A couple of years later, he seriously considered going into police work, but Pitt's defensive coordinator, a fellow named Jimmy Johnson, talked Wannstedt out of it. Wannstedt followed Johnson to Oklahoma State. He left for USC in '83 and rejoined Johnson at Miami in '85. Johnson taught Wannstedt a lot about defense, which became Wannstedt's passion. Initially, Wannstedt appeared to be the leading candidate for the Steelers' head coaching job to replace Chuck Noll. He would be for the Steelers what Mike Ditka was for Chicago, a roaring good fit. He is a yeller and a hugger, emotional but never irrational. But at the moment of decision, Pittsburgh president Dan Rooney cooled on Wannstedt. Sources say Dave came on too strong in interviews, detailing the budget and manpower he had to have to win. Obviously, Johnson had taught him well. Perhaps Rooney preferred a coach he could more easily mold and control. The Steelers surprised the NFL by opting for 34-year-old Bill Cowher, an assistant at Kansas City. And the Cowboys had again been blessed. Wannstedt would have taken offensive line coach Tony Wise with him. And without those two, it would have been very difficult for the Cowboys to do what they did in 1992. Johnson would need Wannstedt in '92. What Wannstedt needed was a pass rusher. St. Edward's University is hidden off I-35 in a wooded neighborhood just south of downtown Austin and the adjacent University of Texas campus. After one summer in Thousand Oaks, California, where the Cowboys had trained since 1963, Jerry Jones made a deal with the fathers of St. Edward's and the city fathers of Austin to move camp to the capital of Texas and its fourth largest city. Made a heck of a deal, Jones did, cutting $500,000 off what the old Cowboys spent to spend a month or so in the paradise found around California Lutheran University. Though St. Ed's has a quaint little liberal arts campus, South Austin is anything but paradise. It is known somewhat derisively as Bubbaville. St. Ed's is surrounded by Ortegone Auto Body Repair, Cowtown Boots, El Gallo Restaurant, and several motels that players wouldn't choose unless maybe it was for an hour. Mostly, though, St. Ed's is surrounded in July and August by heat and humidity. That, for Jones and Jimmy Johnson, was a primary feature. Johnson especially believes in putting his teams in a 100-degree oven for a month. Jones was more interested in the fact that about 70% of the state's population is located within 200 miles of Austin. Though Johnson balked at first, Jones put out the word that any and all Cowboy fans were welcome to watch camp practices free of charge. They overrun St. Ed's each morning and afternoon, sometimes 5,000 strong, pressing up against waist-high chain-link fences covered with ads sold by the Cowboys and fighting for the few seats in the bleachers on the sides of the practice field. Players drive cars or golf carts the quarter mile from the locker room to the Spartan dorms in Chow Hall, mostly to avoid shrieking swarms of autograph seekers. And looming above it all is Jerry Jones, whose presence often dominates camp. He is everywhere, wearing a Cowboy ball cap, a Cowboy shirt, and Cowboy shorts, driving his golf cart up and down the field, conferring with Johnson, negotiating with player agents via portable phone, signing autographs, and of course doing interviews by the thousands. Moving camp to Austin was absolutely brilliant, says PR director Rich Dalrymple. At the annual Blue-White intra-squad game, 130 media people had already swarmed, and about 350 more would cover camp over the next month. Dallas-Fort Worth alone was represented by 4 television stations, 5 radio stations, and 11 newspaper reporters. "If any of you couldn't be with us in California," Jones told an opening media conference, "that's why we're here." The NFL's unwritten rule was that owners should be seen on Sundays from a distance, but not heard. Jones made himself accessible. It was free advertising. It was selling tickets and cowboy merchandise and commercials in cowboy TV and radio programming. It was creating cowboy consciousness. It seemed almost surreal. The man who had fired Tom Landry had returned a conquering hero to the scene of the crime.